everyone. Morning. So today we have Dr. Mathew Hillier from Macquarie University, Sydney, Australia. So our session today will be on transforming assessment for online learning. So Dr. Mathew is a specialist in digital assessment, e-assessment in higher education, and he is currently working as an e-assessment academic at Macquarie University, Sydney. So Doctor, the room is yours. Thank you.
Thanks. Can someone give me co-host, because I'm still not co-host yet? That might be helpful. Okay, can everybody see my slides? Yeah?
Yes, I can see your slide.
Right, now, there's lots of things going on here. Now I need to find where the chat went, because I want to paste a link into the text chat. Okay. All right, so you may get these slides. So I've pasted a link into the text chat, transformingassessment.com/UUM. So if you go there, you'll be able to grab a PDF copy of the slides. And later on the workshop, we'll also have a group activity as well. So you may like, especially to get the files, because there is some information in the slides later on that will provide some details about that group activity that we will do. Okay, so first of all, what I'd like to do is get you guys to type into the text chat. Tell me which discipline area you're from. So down in the text chat, hopefully you've all got access to that. Just type in where you're from, which discipline area you're from. Language. Thank you. English language teaching, sociology, computer science, finance, mathematics, education technology, cool. Media, tourism, comp-sci, ed psychology, finance, accounting, economics. Oh, we've got a nice mix of people. That's fantastic. All right. So hopefully later on, you'll actually also be able to learn from each other. So what I find really useful about, centrally organized workshops is we get to talk to each other as well. Okay, so let's move on. Now, some of the motivation for this presentation, and in fact, a lot of my work on digital assessment and online teaching and learning, is this idea of a gap between particularly the way higher stakes assessments are done and the real world of work and society for that matter, where people engage with modern tools of the trade, particularly pieces of sophisticated software, to solve problems in their discipline. Now in languages, that could be, online dictionaries or translation tools. In engineering, it could be CAD software, etc. But most of our examinations until very, very recently actually have been pen on paper, and they look like the picture on the right, which is a picture from the Monash University exam hall. They actually hire out the horse racing track to run their examinations, and that is one of 3 floors in the building where they run examinations like this every day for 3 weeks. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not been in that situation in the sense of being placed in a room where I've been asked to solve a series of problems, and the only resources that I've got at my disposal are a piece of paper, a pen, and my own brain. That is a very unusual problem-solving scenario in the real world of work and in society, and indeed in most of the rest of our students' education. So the idea of this high stakes examination being what I would refer to as authentic and fit for purpose has to be questioned. Now, of course, COVID-19 has brought up interesting other problems that we are now facing, because we cannot really sit students in a room like this because the infection would go crazy. The virus would be very, very happy with us if we ran an exam just like this now. So we've been forced, if you will, to think about how to do things differently. And I think that sort of presents an interesting opportunity that we'll talk a little bit about later. Now, behind this idea of moving to digitalizing assessment or computerizing assessment is this, there are pedagogical, I suppose, aspirations behind what we might want to do here. We would like meaningful learning to occur, authentic assessment, and to define what some of these things might be. It's active, it's intentional, authentic, cooperative, and constructive. Notice the word memorization is not written on that page. And that's quite deliberate, because what we want people to do is be able to solve real problems and think about real issues and produce responses that are relevant to, I guess, the modern way of working. Authentic assessment, of course, has different meanings to different people, or authentic learning in this case. It's contextually linked. There are activities that reflect what might happen in, when students go out to the workplace, what they do in their social lives. There's a degree of expecting an expert performance. That means that the performance is that of a professional standard. Now, obviously, as we are teaching students in first year and second year and third year, what our expectations are of that performance will increase over time, but we're aiming for expert performance, hopefully by the time they graduate. Again, remembering what an expert performance as a first year out in the workplace might look like. So it doesn't mean expert as in 50 years or 20 years of, professional experience, but it means what does a competent performance. There's also aspects of reflection and collaboration, being able to articulate knowledge of the discipline, problem solving methodologies, metacognition, thinking about thinking. So there's a whole lot of sort of aspects, if you will, that we would like authentic learning, authentic assessment to be able to do. Now, technology can play a role as an enabler in allowing us to do things in assessment that we perhaps could not do in the older world of pen on paper, or multiple choice quiz sets, or just a regular classroom without technology enhancement. I notice you have got a QR code at the start of this workshop for people to register. That's a kind of technology that assists us to do things more efficiently, rather than having paper-based sheets or asking people to send emails or something to register. They can just scan a QR code. So the kinds of technology and the way we use it, we can use technologies to substitute, and I think perhaps the QR code is a good an example of a substitution of a paper-based registration sheet with a digital equivalent. Augmentation would include things like, okay, now we've registered things, perhaps that will show a chart of the number of times that individuals have registered for workshops over time. So as an example of technology that might augment what we're already doing. So if you think about using a word processor, for example, substitution is we're substituting a typewriter for a keyboard. But augmentation means that you've got spell checking capabilities, and you've got the ability to insert graphics and images into that representation of knowledge. Modification allows us to do redesign what tasks can do, and redefinition, of course, is to start to allow things that we could not do before. So up in there, you might think about things like augmented reality. You might think about simulations, learning simulations that could be done. There's a good example from University of Queensland that I could mention about a simulated virtual business environment where you can have collaborative groups working on a whole series of activities within a business scenario where the students need to decide, finances and bank loans and marketing their virtual business and hiring virtual staff. So simulating the process of a business need, that was impossible to do without the technology before. So I think the key idea here is a technology as an enabler for us to do things that are more authentic than we could do before. Another key idea, of course, is when we're thinking about online learning, is we're thinking about how to manage the selection of technology. We're thinking about the managing of the design of learning. Now, it's quite tempting, and I've been guilty of it myself, to find a nice new tool that says, oh, wow, that looks cool. How can I use that in my teaching? I'm sure a few people have had these thoughts before. You know, you might think, oh, augmented reality is such a cool thing, or virtual reality is such a cool thing. How can I use that in my teaching in accounting or engineering or languages, for example? Now that's fine and good because we like to explore if we're innovative educators, but at the same time, that's not necessarily the best way of going about designing a digital learning experience for students. So the TPAC framework I find is useful, I think, in helping to realize the skill sets that we need to acquire as teachers in the modern world. So, you know, universities hire academic staff because you're experts in your field, and very appropriately so. If you weren't an expert in your field, then you probably don't belong in a university. So, you know, consider your discipline content knowledge, what you know about the discipline and the ways of teaching your discipline. Thinking about, of course, what you want to learn or what you want your students to learn, what they want to achieve. So that's the pedagogical knowledge of ways of teaching as well. So there's a role, I think, for learning about teaching. So as educators, we should learn how to teach better ways, and that's indeed why you're sitting in this workshop, you know, virtually. But as I guess a more modern aspect to the teaching scenario is learning about the affordances, capabilities, features of technologies that you can deploy. So with this content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, and technological knowledge, being able to select technologies that achieve the teaching aim that you are trying to set. So if you're working out what is the learning outcomes, what kinds of activities you should do to help meet those learning outcomes, and then which technologies can help you achieve that in efficient and effective ways. So I would caution against sort of grabbing technologies because they're bling, or because they're cool, and then deploying them, because often there's a bit of a mismatch. As an educational technology researcher, there is a legitimate place to play with technology, but don't let that rule what you're going to do. Always think about the learning outcomes first, I guess, is the message behind that. So here's an example of a resource that helps you to think about the affordances of technologies that you might have available to you. Now, those of you who use Moodle, I understand that UUM might use Moodle as your learning management system, as we do at Macquarie University. This particular resource is from the University of New South Wales, where I was working last year. And this is an excellent resource which helps you think about the differences between a blog, a wiki, and a forum, and a portfolio if you want to go that far. Let's just focus on blog, wiki, and portfolio. We're going to revisit this later on as part of our activities as well. So thinking about the affordances or the capabilities of these technologies, and I've given you a link there as well. There's the, actually what I can do is paste that into the text chat so that you may want to go and have a quick look at that page. There you go. And there's also another excellent tool that's a little resource that's a little more general, and that's the Moodle Tools Guide, in case you have not encountered that before. And both of those gives you an idea of which tool you might pick to achieve a certain outcome in the educational sense. So hopefully that will be useful to you. Now we all realize we're in the time of COVID-19, and this crisis has upended our worlds. You know, in Australia, some of the states are now almost back to regular life, whereas other states like Victoria, Melbourne, has got a massive outbreak again, and people are reconsidering how they're going to do their education. Certainly in the first half of the year, COVID-19 hit the Australian education system about 3 weeks into our university semester. So the first couple of weeks, students were still attending classes, and then suddenly they were all told to go home and stay there. I guess similar things may have happened in Malaysia as well, and many countries around the world. But at the same time, whilst we have been forced to convert our teaching to online, we've done it in a very hurried manner. And some things have worked and some things have maybe not worked so well, but we're learning very rapidly. However, what we have observed, I think, in many universities is the realization now that technology and online learning has a role to play. And this may happen, and hopefully this realization that people can explore new ways of teaching and students will experience new ways of learning that they may not have had access to before, at least on the scale, the large scale that we have now. This presents us with an opportunity. But with that opportunity, there are choices to be made as individuals and as university institutions as to how we might want to go with there. So, you know, if those of you who remember the Matrix movie with the blue pill and the red pill, we have a choice. We can continue to, I suppose, do a flipped sort of rapid model where we try and jam in what we were doing before into the online space, or we can take this as an opportunity for actually redeveloping what we do in education to provide a better online learning experience for our students. So I think there's this idea of migrate or transform. Stuart Allen gave a webinar for us back in May around this idea of what this means for online examinations, how people will perceive the move to online examinations. You can merely migrate, and that just means you take an efficiency first perspective on it. You may do things like convert your paper-based exams into an online quiz that sits on the internet or in Moodle. But you're basically just taking a paper-based exam and converting it directly without making any changes to the questions. This is what I like to call paper version 1.1. It's fancy paper, really. It's digital paper. And it tends towards the idea of assessment of learning, because that's where the high stakes end of semester exam hall, like I showed at Monash, that kind of examination is really assessment of learning. We're trying to work out, of course, what students have learnt during the semester and give them a mark. But assessment can be so much more than that. So the idea of assessment as and for learning. So can the assessment task itself engender in our students more learning, not just measurement of learning that's already happened, but the assessment task itself is also a learning experience. And I think that's where the idea of transformation comes in, where well, at least in my opinion, that this is more of an authentic first approach. So we're less concerned with, you know, using computers purely for their efficiency gain, but we're also interested in using computers for the affordances and the capabilities they offer us to do more authentic forms of assessment. And this means things like constructed, complex responses that can be possible, potentially even in open environments, with the realization that the internet itself is a modern tool of the trade that we all use to solve problems. You know, if I have a question and I don't know the answer to something, the first thing I probably do is ask Mr. Google. I can pose a question and try and find some resources to help me solve my problem. So this is, I think, has to be recognized as a realistic element in the modern problem-solving environment. And that's, I guess, why I would consider this to be what I call post-paper. So, you know, going beyond the limitations of paper and using the same R model as we showed with that hierarchy of levels to move towards redefinition and transformation of what's possible. In fact, you're welcome to go and view the webinar from Alan, Stuart Allen. It's on our website. You can see it for free if you like. Now, what might I define as good assessment? In the sense, there are, I suppose, what you might say, competing priorities with what you might call good assessment. So here's a sort of the idea that there's this potentially a tension between the kinds of things that people would do, the kinds of priorities that teachers and administrators and technology departments might make decisions in moving forward with changing the way we do assessment in our organizations. And there are competing needs. So authenticity, integrity, and scalability are often elements that come to play when we, say, for example, choose a new computerized exam system. I'll just go back to that previous slide. So authenticity is more than just, is it realistic? But all sorts of, are we able to use tools of the trade? Are we able to design that into the assessment? Are we allowed to have our students use those tools? It has to be adaptable to blended and fully online contexts. And I think there has to be an element of openness with the systems that we deploy. I think the role of things like learning analytics is being held up because what's happened in the past is we have a lot of legacy systems in teaching and learning, and the students' data is trapped in these little black boxes or proprietary black boxes. And it's often difficult to get an overview of the students' learning experience and the learning journey because a lot of their data is trapped in little digital black boxes that we can't get access to very easily. Then we got the issues around scalability. Our classes are getting larger and larger over time. Is it going to be practical, doable? Is it going to be cost effective? We don't have unlimited money, and that in fact is becoming a more and more pressing problem. Australian universities, for example, have lost 30% of their revenue since the beginning of this year. So cost effectiveness of whatever we do is a big concern. There's also the idea of, is it going to be reliable? Particularly for higher stakes assessments. So the architecture, the systems that you are using, are they going to be reliable and robust? Complexity and sophistication also means work. There are potentially implications for people's workloads. Of course, it's very easy to farm out a multiple choice quiz because it marks itself, and that's lovely. But is it a particularly authentic assessment? No, probably not. So there are tensions in there. And we need, of course, to think about how the logistics is going to work. Most universities are well versed at running high stakes examinations, as you saw the photo of the Monash exam hall on the first slide. Universities have become very good at doing that. They're very efficient at doing that. They know how to do that. But then when we move to the online world, that's an unfamiliar space. Even if we were to say, for example, keep on-campus exams but computerize them, that has changes and implications. So institutions need to learn how to do that, and academics need to learn how to deal with those new systems. So there is definitely implications. The other one, of course, is assessment integrity. Are the assessments themselves valid? That's one thing, but are they secured? Are we considering academic integrity and the risk of cheating? Often we think about cheating as a big ogre that's sitting over our head, and a lot of the time we say, well, we have to give the students a supervised examination because otherwise they'll just cheat. Now that's a very complex area, and colleagues elsewhere have done a lot of work in it. Tracy Brigtag from University of South Australia in Adelaide has done work, and colleagues at Deakin University, if I think of his name in a minute, it's just gone out of my head, will be, if you have a look at our Transforming Assessment website, we have got some discussions around online cheating and online detecting contract cheating, for example, in the online space. So those concerns are pretty big in the minds of academics and indeed students and university administrators that we can't ignore. So this balance, if you will, between how authentic or real we want our assessments to be, how relevant, how rigorous they should be, to reflect the real world work that our students will do, real world society, the balance around assessment integrity, protection of academic integrity, and of course scalability and doability. So there's this idea that we potentially need to pick between these. I've observed, for example, in the in the marketplace around computerized exam systems, what's tended to happen is scalability and integrity have been focused upon, and what we end up getting is an online multiple choice quizzing system. Whereas if we focus on authenticity, we might get a different kind of computer system that helps us to do that. And indeed, a project that I was running over the last 5 years across 10 universities in Australia, we built a platform that allows authenticity in higher stakes assessments. Now, that's not necessarily something that's available in the market very widely at the moment. But in thinking about it, institutions and teachers academics need to consider this trade-off. Now, what I would like you to do is vote. So now you get to participate. Now I've set up something called Menti. Now I need to go and swap my screen to start. I think I need to start the presentation in Menti. Let's go present. Okay, so I'm not sure if you can see my screen or not. Hopefully you can. So what I want you to do is go to that link. I'll just go back to, go back to PowerPoint. So go to menti.com, and then I want you to type in the code 820607. I'll leave that displayed on the screen. So that's your PIN code to access the survey. If anybody has any problems with that, just shout out, give a yell, because I can't see you at the moment. Let me just check the text chat. Oops. Hopefully you're all still there. So please go to menti.com, use the PIN code 820607, and have your say. There we go. We've got some people coming through already. Excellent. People are voting. Yay, it works. Well, I'm heartened to see that. Ooh, look, authenticity is definitely in the running, isn't it? Hopefully you can all see the chart adjusting itself on the screen there.
No, we cannot see the chat.
Okay, I know what's happening. Let me just stop the share, and I will reshare, because I think I know what's going on. We need to share the right screen, right window, don't we? Okay, there we go. Now we've got the Menti results coming in. Hopefully you can see the pie chart now. All good, thank you. Integrity and scalability, and authenticity and scalability. So our focus has been, interestingly, authenticity and integrity. That means you'd like to stop cheating as much as possible, but you'd like your assessments to be real world. That's really encouraging. Hopefully you'll tell your university administrators this, because often what I find is the integrity and scalability one, in fact, is where a lot of online learning systems, or testing systems particularly, focus their effort. And I'm really happy to see that the academic community in your university is interested in authenticity and integrity. You know, scalability is one of those things where we think, we would love authenticity and integrity, but can I do it as a university teacher in the time and the resources that I've got available? So it's kind of like that. Is it going to work for my real world, in my real world as a teacher? But the authenticity, integrity, I think, is much more of a student-focused, student-facing. This is us caring about what happens with our students, because integrity is important to us, but it's also important to our students. So thank you for that. I'll stop that and go back to my slides. Stop that one. Share back to the slides. Where's my slides gone? There they are. Okay, so let's move on from there. Now, what we've been doing, I suppose, over the past hundreds of years, is we've run largely on-campus education. Distance education has been growing, but it's always more or less been, in many universities at least, a niche area, sort of a specialist. That's the extension office job or the online learning unit's job. It's rarely been the job of every university teacher in our organisations, unless you work for a distance education provider, but most of us don't. So when we come to do digital assessment, I guess there are some implications for both us as teachers and our institutions in the shift. So if we think about, are we going to do digital assessment and where we're going to do it? Are we going to do it on the internet with a live network connection and be dependent upon it? Or can we do computerized assessment that doesn't necessarily need a network connection? Think about, for example, if you assign a student an assignment, then they don't have to necessarily use the internet for the duration of that assignment. They can be typing in their Word document in, sitting on the beach in the sun, not that they'll see their screen very well, but you know what I mean. So the on-campus context or distance at home. Generally, if we're on campus, we have much better control over the environment. We can do things like invigilate the session. We can provide network resources for people. We can provide potentially computer labs and things like that. However, if we want to scale up digital assessments in the online space, then things like supplying 2,000 computers to a large first year unit examination is not necessarily going to be doable on campus or anywhere for that matter. So we need to consider things like bring your own laptops. Does your university have a BYOD strategy? How are you supporting the students in using their BYOD on campus? Are you providing Wi-Fi? Yes, often that's the case. But what often isn't the case is power sockets, electricity supply. Unfortunately, laptops don't just run on hot air, they need electricity. And if we think about the whole day of that student's learning, if you're on campus, then they need access to electricity. It's a simple thing, but it's often very forgotten on most campuses, although that is starting to change. If we talk about distance at home, and this is, of course, this is becoming to stark relief, I think, in COVID-19, we have a lot less control over the space when the student's at home. In fact, we almost have no control, unless you consider things like online proctoring systems, but that's a different discussion. So space, what sort of space does the student have to do their learning? What we've found at Macquarie University is not all of our students have a suitable place to do their learning, let alone a computerized online exam. Things like network connectivity is problematic. Do they have an appropriate computer that will allow them to do it at home? So these equity and access issues raise their head, particularly when we're talking about distance education and distance at home assessments. We have less control, as I said, over the environment. So there are all sorts of implications depending on the context or the situation where your digital assessment or your online exam, if you want to go that far, is situated. And these are concerns we need to worry about. And there's some of this is beyond just assessment design. We can design assessments in certain ways to allow to take these things into consideration. We can provide more time. We can provide flexibility about the format the student submits the assessment. But at the end of the day, there has to be a role for broader policy in our institutions as well. Again, this is, I suppose, revisiting the idea of assessment integrity and authenticity and how the place of examinations might fit. So, what we tend to do, what we've traditionally done is pen on paper exams, multiple choices. They tend to be relatively artificial. They tend to be based on recall of facts. So, you can, of course, have problem solving and things in pen and paper exams, but not quite to the same level as what we can if we do it in a computerized environment. Particularly, students have no access to modern tools of the trade. Now, if we talk about, pen on paper exams in the supervised environment, we tend to see that as having high integrity, high anti-cheating, because we sit there and we watch the students do it. We can verify their identity potentially as they come in the exam room and we watch them do it the whole time. but we pay the price in the sense that it's not a very authentic environment. You know, the take-home exam has been something that has been increasing, I think, particularly in the first half of this year. A lot of people just said, we're doing take-home exams because we can't do them on campus anymore. This has real implications for both authenticity and assessment integrity. If we merely convert our pen on paper exam that we used to offer in the exam hall and say, guys, okay, now you're going to take it home, you give it to me tomorrow, you got 24 hours to do it. What tends to happen is the worst of all worlds, in the sense that those are not particularly authentic tasks. The task doesn't match the mode of offering. It opens the doors for cheating quite a lot. And indeed, in the current university where I'm working, the incidences of cheating allegations went up significantly vis-a-vis what was occurring last year when they had supervised exams. And then we talk about digitizing the process, or we could set assignments, for example, to balance out integrity and authenticity. In the past, what we've done is we've set exams that are not very authentic, but we've set assignments as well, where students can do much more constructed, rich responses, group work, etc. And we've also realized that perhaps integrity is a little bit loose there because, you know, contract cheating. If you set them an essay or a report to do, then it's quite possible that that person is going to ask somebody else to do it for them because we're not watching them. So in the past, we've had this choice between assessment with integrity or assessment with authenticity, but we haven't been able to get the both. And I think what I would like to argue here is that the characteristics of an assignment where students can use the tools of the trade, you know, spreadsheets and CAD software, etc., in an unsupervised assignment, if we could bring that into the exam room context with a digital exam, what we can do is increase the level of authenticity in the assessment, whilst also maintaining a level of assessment integrity. So there's something to think about there, but it's not just easy as it's easier said than done, as they say. And this idea of implementing digital assessment, particularly, I don't want to focus too much on the exams, but that's been my work. And we'll get away from the exams in a minute, I promise you. But the idea of what you're going to choose, how you're going to implement it, what platforms you'll do, the project management iron triangle is alive and well here. It applies in education as well as it does in project management. Good, quick, cheap, pick two, right? Often we find that certainly in the exam project that I run, I was aiming for good. I didn't have much money, therefore it was cheap. It couldn't be quick. So the project took 5 years to develop, you know, what would have been developed in perhaps 12 months if I had lots of money. So, I mean, and that works the same when you're implementing new processes and procedures in universities. We have to also be understanding and forgiving of ourselves. We want it to be good. And I think you've shown that when you picked authenticity and integrity. But the other ones, quick and cheap, are around speed of implementation, of course, and efficiency and effectiveness. You know, the reality is we don't have a lot of money, and therefore I think we have to have patience to make sure that we implement these things properly over time. We can start now and we can build gradually. Unless, of course, you've got somebody who's going to give you a lot of money, and then you can speed that process up very quickly. So the next one I want you to think about is this idea of authentic assessment. Now, I've been talking about it a little bit so far. Again, if you can go to menti.com, the same code, and I will move the slides on. Just a minute. Okay, I need to move the slide on. Okay, so what I want you to do is hopefully if you can go back to that same Menti page, and you'll see the question there. What I want you to do is type in just 1 or 2 words that describe or what you think about in your mind. What does authentic assessment mean to you to your discipline area, okay? So I'll just stop my share and swap to the slide so you can see it, and hopefully share that. Okay, so hopefully what will happen, there we go. We've got, this is a word cloud. So personalized, complex, pure, realistic, real, new. Yes, it's definitely new to some people. Excellent. Genuine, pure. Okay, keep it coming. Empirical, yes. Lifestyles, reflecting lifestyles, okay. Factual, genuine. Measure the learning objective. That's excellent. Fantastic. Real world setting, yes. Not copy and paste, I like that one. Yes, yes, that's a good point. If the students can copy and paste the response, it's probably not a very authentic assessment. No plagiarism. Okay, that's an interesting spin on it, yes. Okay. Notice that genuine is nice and big. Genuine, original, real life. Or reflective of the real life, you know. We work in a university, and our students are still students. So the other thing is we have to reflect that it's not going to be a carbon copy of real life. It is a subset or a simulation of what might be a genuine real life experience for our students. So this could just mean that you might set up a scenario that students can follow that's more reflective of, you know, what might happen in the real world. Okay, I will swap back there. Thank you for your input. That's excellent. I can see that your thinking is along the lines that I would like to see. Let's go back to share the screen of the slides again. Okay. Oops. Hang on. Figure out where I was. There we go. So what can we do? Some examples. Let's look at some examples of things that might approach a fit for purpose assessment that could be authentic, scalable, and hopefully secure. So let's have a consideration. Now, transforming assessment webinars, I'm going to promote these a little bit. So there's a recording of a session that was presented by some academics from the Griffith University in Queensland about interactive online oral assessments. And they were using these in their business school as a replacement to final examinations. So they got rid of the final exam, and instead they did these interactive online oral scenario based. So the scenarios were set up to replicate or simulate a similar kind of encounter or activity that might happen once the students go out into the workplace. So it could be things like defense of the work that they have already done. So you might say to the colleagues, well, this is my solution to it. Why is my solution better than somebody else's? It could be a job interview. It could be a simulated media interview. It could be a presentation to the board of shareholders, you know, or report to management. Could be a shareholders meeting, a pitch to a client, etc. You know, it could be a patient diagnosis if you're in medicine. It could be, so the medical field, you know, the health sciences area have done things like OSCEs and oral assessments and Viva assessments. These kind of, and practical style assessments with stations and things. So I think that idea is less foreign to some areas, some disciplines, but I think what's happened, what's been demonstrated, is that this approach can work, and it can be scalable, and it can be authentic. There are, of course, some caveats around it in terms of being organized and staffing this. So, you know, they used 10 to 15 minute slots. They provided a buffer between them. They used an online booking system. That university used Microsoft Teams and their Blackboard Collaborate Ultra online conferencing system to conduct it. But you could use Zoom, you can use Moodle groups, you can use an online booking tool, whatever. The collection of technology we can work out later. But the idea of using an online interactive oral is quite appealing because you can have a conversation with the student. And what Griffith did is they had their tutors working on, so it wasn't just the lead lecturer, the unit coordinator that did this work. They would have to, of course, moderate their assessment processes with the team of tutors, and they would have parallel orals running at the same time in order to be able to get through them all. But of course, the advantages of an interactive online oral through a tool like Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate is that you can record the session, and that allows you to moderate afterwards, and it allows you to have evidence to back up what you might have done during the session. So if there's ever a dispute, it's all recorded for you. So I think this approach is quite powerful. There's a full webinar on it, and in fact there's going to be a link, because this is one of the scenarios that you'll work on a bit later. And there's a link to the webinar that you can go and watch. Oops, I keep clicking on the wrong thing. I need to go down there. Oops. Okay, another one is virtual work integrated learning. In the past, a lot of our students had the opportunity to go out into workplaces, but in the time of COVID-19, not really so possible. And the other problem with work integrated learning in the traditional sense is it suffers from the scalability problem. Do we have enough employers to host all of our students? So University of Western Australia started utilising simulations and virtual work integrated learning, where there's a combination of simulations, online simulations, or virtual business environments, and using technologies like Zoom and online meeting tools to consult with workplace partners that the institution has set up. And I think this is actually quite a good idea of increasing the authenticity of what we can do in learning tasks and indeed in assessment, because we're linking our students to industry and professional contexts. And indeed, if you think about it, we're all working online a lot these days. Many people are working from home. Many people are doing online meetings. Quite a number of universities in Australia, they are actually banning the staff from going to the campus at the moment. You're not allowed to go to your office. My university is not one of those, but another university in this city has banned their staff from going to campus. So everything is now taught online. Everything is, all the staff do their meetings online and collaboration online. So I think, for our time in history where we are now, online work integrated learning is a really authentic approach to doing it. Now, of course, that may not work in all discipline areas, particularly where there's a physical element to it. I mean, veterinary science, health science, agriculture, for example, where you need to get out in the field. So this has its limitations, but I think it's it's worth considering for certain disciplines and certain contexts. I mean, even in all of those contexts, there's an element of online working that we can have our students do. Coming back to earth a little bit more in terms of where we might, so using discussion forums, University of New South Wales have got a nice resource on that. There's some links on the slide there. I'll just type them into the text chat, so you might click it. Hang on, just give me a second. Now I've lost the text chat. Where's the text chat? All right, paste that in there. So there's a link to that one. And in fact, I'll paste the other one in there while I'm here. Copy, paste. There we go. So the first link to assessing the discussion board you see in the discussion list is more details and more options about different ways you can use asynchronous discussions. what we certainly found at Macquarie is that the role of the teacher is really quite critical in running effective online asynchronous discussions. What you should not do is open a discussion forum on Moodle and then just rely on the students to go there and get involved. Just like you do in a real classroom, you are the facilitator of that learning, those learning activities, those discussion groups, etc. And you need to be involved in that process. It needs to be a designed process. And I think, online discussion forums can be very powerful because they allow people to access it in their own time. They allow for students to consider what they want to say and post to the forum in their own time. Whereas if we just have a Zoom session, not everybody gets the time to have their say, and not everybody has got the time to think about their response thoughtfully. So asynchronous discussions do some things that Zoom can't. Zoom is appropriate in other circumstances for sure, but discussion forums are powerful, but only if they're used and they're facilitated properly. Let me just move that out of the way because I don't know if it's interfering with the screen. All right. Another example, I suppose, is considering the tools that we deploy in our assessment tasks. So in the sense that what is an authentic tool for assessment? I would argue a writing, a composition, a problem presentation environment like a word processor is more authentic than a text box on a screen. Now, both are computerized, but one is a lot more authentic than the other. So the screenshot on the right is a screenshot from an online exam system. And essentially the student has just got a text box to respond. Now, don't get me wrong, this can have its place, but it's not a particularly authentic way of presenting knowledge in the modern world. We use word processors and websites, and we use multimedia and things like that. So I think there are more authentic tools that we can select, and indeed we should be using when setting our assessment tasks. Let me just scroll down because I'm losing my place. Page down. Oops. All right, lost it there a bit. Right, same, engineering. Now, the caveat here is that both of these have their place, but one is more authentic than the other. So if we think about authentic problem solving, by the time we want our students to graduate, we would hope that they are proficient in the modern tools of the trade. And that probably includes things like computer-aided design software. Now, of course, that doesn't apply in veterinary medicine, but it certainly applies in engineering. In computer programming, we want our students to be proficient with the modern tools of the trade, like GitHub and Java programming or whatever the latest thing is, and the tools that help students do that more efficiently. Now, the thing on the right, which of course is an old-fashioned pen on paper exam that could be converted into a Moodle quiz, mind you, is not particularly authentic on its own. Now, it does have its place, so don't think for a minute that you cannot use a test like the thing on the right. But if that's as far as we go, if we don't go any further, I don't think we're serving our students particularly well. So, this is a sort of a consideration. How do we go about making these authentic tools of the trade available in the context of particularly higher stakes assessments? And my advice would be to, I guess, to start simple and build up. So you might start with a Moodle document or a Moodle quiz, and then you can add things like multimedia. You can add things like a PDF file that provides data that the student will then analyze. They might analyze it using a piece of analysis software. In computer programming, it might be introductory computer programming. Even you might provide them with a Scratch environment or a PHP environment or whatever. You can use spreadsheets. So in business and accounting and finance and things, or economics, you might provide a spreadsheet as a simulation, or you might have students create or edit a spreadsheet as part of their response to a question. And I'll show you how you can integrate that with a Moodle quiz a bit later. Of course, as I've mentioned, specialist applications for the discipline. You may even do things like integrate a simulation. The simulation down there that looks like a marketplace is is a virtual world environment developed by a colleague at Monash University, Scott Grant. He developed this 3D virtual world for task-based language learning. And you go into this 3D virtual space and you interact in the environment in Chinese. So he wanted to teach his students, he's a Chinese lecturer. He wanted to make available opportunities for students to use language. Now he's based in Melbourne, and yes, there's a Chinatown that you can go to and you can potentially learn, communicate in Chinese, but there's 300 students in that class, and I'm sure the market stall owner is going to get really annoyed if Scott was to send his 300 students to the market to practice their Chinese. Whereas a virtual environment allows the students to undertake that learning activity without, these are more authentic than it would be if it was just book or pen on paper exercises. And I think these sort of tools have applications in setting assessment tasks as well. Next slide, page down, there we go. So here is an example of applying or using a spreadsheet in conjunction with an assessment task in Moodle. So we actually developed a whole lot of these examples. So it's just a simple matter in this case of creating a spreadsheet that you want to use, writing the question with the assumption that the spreadsheet is available to the student, and then attaching the spreadsheet as an attachment to the Moodle quiz question. So then they click the link, the spreadsheet downloads, and the student does something in the spreadsheet. They have to, constructed inquiry, if you will, manipulate the spreadsheet to come up with the answer. Now they can type the answer into the Moodle quiz, and that allows the answer to be automatically marked. So that's sort of one level closer, getting closer to authenticity of a task. But we're thinking about also how efficient and scalable it is, because they can answer via Moodle. Now, the next example takes that a little bit further. This time what we want to do is give students, again, a tool of the trade, but now they have to make something as part of their response to our Moodle quiz. So in this case, the example is to program a small program and submit the code file for assessment. Now, the code file will need a human to mark it at this point, unless you have something like Code Runner plugin for Moodle. But the idea is you're using the Moodle quiz as a more efficient way of presenting, tracking the assessment, because it can be online and you can set it up in advance and you can receive all of the responses. You still have to human mark it, but it's again the example of using a tool of the trade in the context of computer programming lessons, i.e. Scratch, in conjunction with a Moodle quiz. So it's taking the idea of a paper-based exam where the students might handwrite their code in the past, which is a really inauthentic, not authentic way of doing computer programming. Nobody writes out their code. But in the examination room, that's what we expect students to do. So this is a sort of, I guess, an example of using technology to enable more authentic assessments in that context. Now, we ran a whole lot of projects around it, and I guess you want to think, well, okay, this is all great, I'm excited, but what do the students think? So we had 10 universities involved, or only about 8 of them did trials and pilots. So these kind of examples that I've just shown you were examples of the kind of exams that we were able to set. Now, what do the students think of this? Well, I think the pie chart says it's reasonably good. It's not perfect. You're not going to please everybody all the time, but if you can please most of the people most of the time, I think you've done a good job. So I was reasonably happy that 90% of the students were okay or liked it or really liked it. I would recommend the e-exam system to other people. If the student's going to say to their friends, yes, that was great, I'll do it, I recommend you go for that. That sort of tells you that that the experience overall was pretty good for the students. And we can see that that's a pretty positive response. Of course, there are some people that disagree, and finding out why they disagreed. Now, some of those were incidents that happened in individual exams. But we should also learn from that and move forward. but for a piloting of an e-exam, a new e-exam technology, I think, you know, I was pretty pleased with that. Oops, forward. Now, how many people are familiar with using a rubric? Maybe you just want to type into the text chat. Okay, sorry, the link can't open. Which ones was that? Anyway, let me just go to everyone. So if you type into the text chat, if you've used, if you use rubrics in your education practice, in your teaching. Okay, yes, we always use rubrics, and so, excellent, good. Okay, all right, so let's just assume that most people know basically what a rubric is, and I'll go from there. So I'll just go through the next two slides really quickly, and what we will do is when we come to the exercise part of the session, you'll be able to focus on the second phase, if you will, of the group activity. Okay, thanks, folks. Right, so thinking about designing assessment, I mean, I'm assuming that we're relatively cognizant of this idea as well. The learning outcomes essentially drive the whole process. We need to figure out what we want our students to learn by the end of the unit or the course. We need to, of course, then think about proposed assessment tasks that will elicit that. What can we get the students to do to demonstrate that they've learnt something? We need to think about, of course, the criteria against which we're going to assess them. We need to think about, in the rubric context, you know, rows and columns, the standards, levels of performance. What does poor performance look like? What does mediocre? What does passing? What does great? What does fantastic look like? We would like to, of course, to design the task to allow the students to demonstrate that, and select suitable technology tools to allow this to all happen. Now, I acknowledge that this is not a 1, 2, 3, 4 process. There's a bit of iteration, a bit of looping going on, because things like technologies tools will set the boundaries of what is possible. So there has to be some iteration in our design. Next slide, I can go down. All right, okay. So of course, rubric design, very quickly, we have criteria, standards, and the descriptors. It's quite important to get the descriptors accurate or reflective of what we want it to look like, what we want the performance of the student to look like at that particular level of performance for that particular criteria. And if you use Moodle, this is what a rubric looks like, you know, for those people who have time, right? We have standards often expressed in the columns and the individual criteria in the rows. Now, there's pros and cons to using rubrics. In my opinion, I think they deliver or help to deliver clarity for the students and the markers, particularly if you have multiple people working. They can help with efficiency if you've got digital ones. Now, it also potentially, and I say potentially, helps students to judge their own performance. And if we're working in the online learning environment, this is particularly important because they may not have the classroom contact time with you to discuss things like they would before. So facilitated online environments, such as discussion forums and Zoom sessions, become important for us to be able to introduce and discuss with the students what we feel good performance looks like against the criteria. So if rubrics are handled well with our students, in collaboration with our students, then I think we can enable students to be able to judge their own performance. That's provided we make the rubric available to students before they've done the assessment task. So this, in this sense, it can become assessment as learning. So it becomes a learning experience in itself. They're not without their difficulties. I mean, I've certainly found that defining the exact criteria and standards can be quite challenging. And if we're too rigid with rubrics, if we're too fixed in our ways, it doesn't allow us to deal with valid, creative, unexpected responses from students, where they can produce something that's quite valid, correct, but may not be covered by our rubric. So there can be some difficulty in capturing creative outcomes. And this is where we need to iterate the design of our rubrics as well. Some difficulty in capturing the holistic performance. In other words, if it becomes a tick box, students can, in fact, in theory, get full marks, but the whole project or the whole piece of work just does not hang together. So because the rubrics tend to be reductionist in nature, we're chopping it up into little bits. And yes, you can tick all the boxes, but overall, it's just not right. There is the challenge to the rubric as well. There's a couple of links here for rubrics. I will paste those into the text chat. Paste. And a bank of rubrics as well with some examples in there. There you go. And we'll come back to that a little bit later. And as I was saying, students need your guidance. So just providing a rubric on its own is not satisfactory, and particularly not satisfactory in the online space where students don't have the opportunity to ask questions or indeed have conversations with their fellow students in a classroom situation. So students can be novices in interpreting rubrics, and indeed the judgment of the criteria and the standards is a professional skill that they're going to have to learn. So why not kill two birds with one stone and not only help them to make judgments, also perform better in the assessment? Handing a rubric to students and expecting to just understand the words, that, I mean, they might understand their language, the English or the Malay, but they may not know what it looks like. So how do those words translate into performance? What does the performance look like? This is where we can help students. So what I put forward here is consider how to help our students do that and how to help them do it in the online spaces, importantly. So consider how you can help students understand the requirements and their own achievement. So you could co-develop the rubric with your students. You as the teacher would direct the conversation, facilitate the conversation. You could have students work in groups or in pairs and think about the characteristics of what a quality assessment response would look like or how it would be formatted. An example too would be conduct a mock or pretend marking exercise. You could give them examples, etc., and have the students mark the activity and then talk in their groups or talk in the class why they gave the mark in a certain way. And that will sort of help them to develop their judgment skills. And here's a more of a fleshed out example of that. In fact, we've used this similar kind of process in tutor training sessions at University of Queensland, where we trained the tutors to make judgments and use rubrics. And this was a sort of a process we used. But I'll leave it there for now, and we will continue on to what your task is going to be. So very shortly, we're going to put you into breakout groups, and we're going to work through a couple of scenarios. So you can choose option A or option B, and the options I will show you on the following slide. So don't worry yet; it will become obvious in a minute. Consider the support materials, and as I said, the slides on that link hopefully will be available to you. So if you go to transformingassessment.com/UUM, you'll be able to download these full slide sets, which of course contains the description of the task. What I want you to do is work in your group, 15 minutes, thereabouts. We'll see how performance goes. And according to the criteria, option A or option B, what you want to do is list out the main criteria. You don't have to go into standards, just think about the main criteria for now. So that will help perhaps in the group, those people who are new to doing rubrics you'll be able to discuss with your colleagues who are a little more experienced, and you conduct build a rubric yourself. And then part B will be to create a student engagement activity that you could run online to help your students understand the rubric and the assessment and making judgments around that assessment task, and then we'll report back. So just quickly, I'll go through what the tasks are. Option A is we'll have, imagine that students are going to review a theory or a concept from your discipline, and then they will discuss it with other students in terms of how that theory or concept has implications for their work practice or professional practice or whatever practice that might be. There is the question you will have to tackle, of course, is which tool are you going to ask them to use? Remember the slide about the blogs, wikis, and forums? Let's just stick to the available Moodle tools. The links, of course, will be live in the slides. And I want you as a group to design a rubric to assess the task above. So just focus on the criteria at this point. And then design a student engagement activity that you will be able to help the students to understand. And I gave you an example of an engagement activity you can consider. And you might like to do that through a discussion forum, or you might like to do it through a Zoom session, etc. But you will need to split the assessment tool. So when you get your students to use the tool to carry out the assessment, might be a blog, a wiki, or a forum, and put that in one box. And in the other box, conceptual box, is the activity that you will design to have your students engage with the rubric. Think about a class discussion, for example. How would you run a class discussion or a class activity to help students understand that rubric? So that's option A. Option B is to consider how you would have students present to a client or stakeholder group their solution to a problem that you will set from your discipline. So it could be an engineering problem, it could be a marketing problem, it could be an accounting problem, depending on your discipline. So you're going to have your students do oral examination or interactive oral assessment around that topic. Again, think about the tools. Now, there is a link in the slide that you'll be able to download from that link I gave that provides information about how Griffith University set up and run their interactive orals. Don't get too hung up with the technology, because your technology will be different to theirs. And the rubric, of course, you need to produce a rubric that you can use to assess that kind of assessment activity. And it's a good idea, of course, to pre-plan your rubrics so that when you're going through the oral assessments, that you can just tick them off as you go. So that rubric you design in option B will match the task written there in orange: student to present a client or stakeholder group their solution to a problem in your discipline. And again, think about the design of a student activity around helping the students to understand the rubric that you're going to use. But you might also think about what else you might want to do to prepare students for this, because students may not have done an interactive online oral before. So what sort of things should you do to prepare your students for that experience, as well as understanding the criteria which they're going to be assessed? Okay, so there is kind of like the overall shape of that. Now, let me see if I can get access to. Let me just stop sharing the screen for a minute. Yeah. Okay, somebody has shared the slides. Thank you very much. So I'm not sure why the website may not have been working. That was a bit odd. Let me just escape out of that one. Okay, let me just make sure that the page has been published on my website. No, it says it's published. Okay, that's odd. All right, get back there, Alt Tab, So again, hopefully you'll be able to find the slides on that link. If not, let us know if you can't find that PDF file. Can people type into the text chat if they've managed to get the file? Just say yes. Okay. All right. I'm a little more confident that we'll be able to do that. Okay, so we have roughly 58. Let's just say 50 people divided by 8 breakout rooms. That's 6 roughly. All right. Okay, so I'm going to stick you into groups of 5 or 6 approximately, and I'm going to go reduce the number of breakout rooms. I'm going to have 8 rooms. Now, what's going to happen? Hopefully, you've experienced breakout rooms before. So I'm now going to send you breakout rooms. Create. Okay. Now, if you're a staff member, you don't have to go into them. So some of you might find that you're going to get a request. But if you're a staff member, you don't have to. You can just ignore the request. So some groups will be a little bit smaller. Let's go open. So what will happen is, and then I'll try and send you messages. So in about 15 minutes time, I'll call you back. So hopefully, 1, you've got the PDF file. If you scroll to the end of it, you'll see the descriptions of the options A and options B, as well as the description of the high-level tasks that we want you to do. And within 15 minutes, I will call you back and we'll discuss it as a group. We'll share. So whilst you're out there, one member of the group might want to share their screen or a Word document or something to capture the proceedings of the group. So I want you to work as a group, produce the criteria, maybe some just dot points of what your main criteria would be, and then think about the technologies that you want to use for that. Think about, and of course the other part is to think about the design of the activity that you want to do with your students to help them to understand, prepare for the activity, but help them to understand the rubric as well. Okay, open all rooms. So hopefully you'll get access to that and you'll be able to now get the prompt to join the rooms. Okay, so I've visited all the rooms now, and what we'll do is we'll call everybody back in a couple of minutes. Okay, folks. So what we did see in the breakout rooms was quite productive conversations. Some of you had created rubrics. Some of you had borrowed rubrics from somewhere else. That's good. Some of you are just enjoying being a student in the room, which was good. It's good to experience it from the other side, you know, to know how the system works from both sides, because if you're a teacher in Zoom, you don't often get to experience the breakout room side of things as well. So that's good. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is call on a representative of each of the group to share what they concluded. What sort of rubric did you create? What activity did you pick? And what sort of design for a student engagement activity that you might consider? So for the person in, so somebody from group 1, can you please speak? Potentially, you might want to share your screen if you created the document. Hi, yeah, Ismail.
Hi, yep, I remember that I'm in the breakout room 1.
Okay.
Together with Ahmad Sabri, Ahmad Shukri, Aniza, Ayu, and Rohiza. So I hope all my group members can add. So I just start. So we choose the option A. So my name is Muhammad Hafiz. I'm actually from University of Malaysia Perlis, from School of Microelectronic Engineering. So our group choose option A, assessment using Moodle communication tool. So we choose forum for this task due to the following criteria, because we want many-to-many communication. And then we also want sometimes live and synchronous conversation. And then we also want students to share the media. Okay, so from our group experience, we have forum previously, which we can share the media.
Yep.
Okay.
Excellent.
So the second part is on the rubric. So we decide to assess in terms of three main rubrics criteria. The first one is the quality of the contents. Which indicate how relevant the reference and the sources which the students shared in the forum, and then the analytical skills, because there are two parts in this group activity. One is the theory part, and the other one is the implication to the practice, right? So we want to see not only relevant references and sources, but also how the ability of the student, how they connect between the theory and the practice. And then the third part, of course, we want to see in terms of their contribution. So the third rubric is on the participation and communication, which is the teamwork between the team members. Okay, and then for the student activities, seems we decided to use the forum. So of course, we want to see the discussion between the students in the forums, and then as well as the presentation or share of media on the summary or conclude the connection between the theory and practice.
Yep.
So we finish at that point when the breakout room closed.
Okay,
right,
no
so
problem.
I
no
hope
problem.
the other group members can add to that point. Ahmad Sabri, Ahmad Shukri, Aniza, Ayu, and Rohiza. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you. So what I will do is, did somebody else who picked option A, did anybody get as far as designing a student engagement activity to help them understand the rubric? Does anybody, can somebody share what they discussed?
We did when you dropped in our room and you asked us to do that. We have done it.
Excellent.
Remember
Can you tell?
the teacher educators. Yeah, I'll just share our screen quickly.
Yep. Excellent.
Okay. Okay, can you see our screen? Everybody can see?
We can
yeah,
share.
okay.
Yeah.
I'll go very quickly because we have less time. We were teaching Jean Piaget's stages of cognitive development. Dr. Paramjit and I were there in the group. Learning outcomes was students should be able to design age-appropriate activity. And these are two learning outcomes. Okay, the activity we would do was we'll ask them to present a role play while explaining the fundamentals. So they might make a YouTube video or a Flipgrid video, and they would design age-appropriate activity lesson plan, which they would present through this web tool, Google Doc or Word Doc. Rubrics for activity 1, we kept it very simple because we have less time. We can go more fancy later. The information is precise, communication was clear, and the concept explained fits the role plays. We'll go from 1 to 3, poor to excellent. For the activity lesson plan, we'll do again 1 to 3, poor to excellent, and these are the 3 areas. If the topic is good, stages are it's clearly explained. Activity reflects connection with the theory, and it's clear and practical. Okay, this is something important. We enjoyed doing it, and I never realized we should do this. So this is wonderful. So yeah, Dr. Paramjit was very productive here. Like, she was very innovative. We thought that what we'll do is we'll give them these rubrics and engage them with the rubrics. Maybe read it and interpret it. What do you understand? Do you have any questions? And then we'll discuss the meaning and get their feedback and finalize the rubric that would they like their work to be assessed against these rubrics. And
that's an excellent idea. Having the students involved in the creation, co-creating the rubric is an excellent way of making the students feel they're involved as well. Yeah, right. As well as understanding it. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And then Dr. Paramjit came up with this brilliant idea that we can show them an exemplar of a YouTube role play and a lesson plan template and walk through each rubric in relation to the exemplar. Like, look, it is clear, so I'm going to give it excellent. And look, there is no relation to theory, so I'm going to give it 1. So students are able to establish a connection with the rubric and the activity. And in the end, we will ask the students to use these rubrics and assess the exemplar that we have given them. And I hope by then they'll understand the rubric and they will have a clear idea how their work would look like. That is it.
Excellent, excellent work.
Thank you.
That was a really great outcome. Fantastic.
Thank you. A+.
Okay. All right. So is there a group who might have done the interactive oral option B for their choice?
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Group 7 did it. So I would just like to share what we did.
Please.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, we can see your screen. Good.
Okay. Right. So our task is actually, we will tell the students to bid for a grant, and they're supposed to prepare a 5-minute summary of their project, and their speech need to convince a panel of judges. And the judges will be having a virtual session with them, and they are to use a suitable e-platform. And then actually this idea came from the fact that among us, there were some lecturers who are from the biology department. So we assume that when they're doing a presentation, instead of asking them to do a topic in the biology, it will look like they are bidding for a grant in that particular topic. So they're supposed to work on how to convince the judges, and so they have to show that they know the content. So the rubric,
excellent.
Plus minus the rubric is, we will look at the aspects of the criteria of content, delivery, organization, creativity, demonstrate knowledge of the content, and student preparedness.
Right,
and then to help the students understand the rubric, we will give them a video from the TED Talk, and we will give the link, and then we'll ask the students to use the rubric provided to assess that presentation. And after they have presented, they are supposed to pair up and discuss the justification as to why they gave those marks and to what extent they understand the criteria in the rubric. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, good. So given you're talking about grant application, you're talking about content knowledge, your rubric covers various different aspects of doing a presentation as well as the content, which is good. But then you want to think about how you might weight that criteria as well. So given the fact that you want them to display biology knowledge, that you probably weight the criteria for the knowledge and content part of the presentation more highly than just the delivery, for example. So the content may get a higher weighting, justification or argument, that might get a higher weighting. So it's not just that these are all weighted the same, these criteria, but they have different weightings as well.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent job. Thank you, thank you. All right, if you can stop sharing the screen, that would be great. Okay, thank you very much, folks. Let me just share my screen because I just wanted to show just the very last part, because we're now almost finished. So I'm just going to get it to capture in the recording. There's a whole bunch of references that you can find that we've used to construct various different bits of information in this presentation, and some theory and examples and things like that. I particularly recommend the Digital Assessment Toolkit. That's the last link down the bottom, developed by University of New South Wales. They've got quite a lot of really nice examples. If I can find where the text chat's gone. Let me just paste that. Paste. All right. So Digital Assessment Toolkit from University of New South Wales. They have quite a few different examples of using digital technologies for assessment. And they show a little example. They show what's good, what works, what considerations you need to have. So they tell you the problems as well as the advantages, what you need to look out for. So I think it's an excellent sort of resource that you can use to get some ideas into the future. And we're right on time, so it's now almost on the hour of, well, it's nearly 2 p.m. here, not in Sydney, but I guess it's nearly midday in Malaysia. So I've got some links. So if you want to add me in LinkedIn, just go to mathewhillier.com. That will point to my LinkedIn profile. You can find a whole lot of other resources, particularly the webinar recordings under the past events section of transformingassessment.com. And if you're particularly interested in computerized examinations, you might want to look at the project website transformingexams.com. under the research section, you'll find quite a few papers we've published around our experiences of running computerized authentic exams. Now, bear in mind that that was before COVID-19, so a lot of those were on-campus computerized exams. I think there are nevertheless lessons that are applicable for the online environment. So this concludes our workshop. If you would like, as I said, to contact me, you're welcome to. If the Teaching and Learning Centre people want to speak, please let me know. Any final words that you'd like to say? Is there an evaluation, for example, that the participants need to do? If somebody from UTC might like to talk, please. Stop sharing. Actually, what I'd like to do is do a group photo. Shall we have a group photo? Can everybody turn on their webcams?
Oh, okay. Yes, please, Doctor.
All right, I'll get the screen grabby thing. Let's everybody get on.
Oh, we see everybody.
Yeah,
Wow.
wait, everybody. Say hi, everyone. You can see what you look like now. We have 3 screens of people, so the more people that turn on.
Please, anyone?
Yeah, all right, let's go.
Sorry, I couldn't
Let's
look
do
at you.
a time screen, start timer. Okay, I'm doing a screenshot on my own computer. So
All right.
I'll let you know. 5, 4, 3, wave, 2, 1. Okay, we have a screenshot. I'll send it to the UTC people and we can share.
All right.
Thanks, folks. It was really good to meet you all.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah, I hope you learned. Hope it was useful for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
Thank you very
Doctor.
much.
Really.